So this video will help you figure out when you need to cite information and when you don't. All right, so when do you cite? There's two situations when you cite information. First one is when you use someone else's words, and the second situation is when you use someone else's ideas. So it's not just the words, it's the ideas. If someone comes up with a proposition or an idea or a theory, whatever it might be, you need to cite it. Because not citing is like stealing. You know, it might not have a monetary value, but it's the same thing as stealing. So how do I know what I don't know? And that's the difficult part when you try to figure out what do you need to cite and what don't you. So we don't need to cite what's considered common knowledge, and it's something known by most people. It doesn't mean that you have to know it or be familiar with it, but it has to be that something that would be considered that a reasonable person would know something about it. So let's take a quiz. What is the rhino's horn made of? Skin. Entomology is the science that studies insects. Exposure to sunlight helps a person improve his or her health because the ultraviolet rays convert skin oil into vitamin D. What beer is marketed as the king of beers? Budweiser. How many toes does a dog have? 16. Grand Central Terminal, Park Avenue, New York is the world's largest railway. This longitude line forms the great circle that divides the Earth into two hemispheres. Equator. Which is the smallest ocean in the world? The Indian Ocean. How is the number 5 written in Roman numerals? Which is the biggest state in the US? And we're talking about landmass. Alaska. How many keys are on a standard piano? 88. How many rings are in the Olympic flag? 5. And here's a photograph just so that you can see it. What is the most populous country in the world? And that's China. Which country did America purchase the state of Alaska from? Russia. Which country gave America the Statue of Liberty? France. So you've just taken this quiz, and you might not have known a lot of those answers. You might have had to look them up. With the dogs, you might have just been mentally trying to count the toes, those type of things. In spite of the fact that you might not have known the answer to many of those questions, every one of those facts is considered common knowledge. So let's talk about common knowledge a little bit. So how do you know what's common knowledge and isn't? So let's think about it. First, it's information that most people know, such as water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or that Barack Obama was the first American of mixed race to be elected president. So even if it turns out that you can't remember the 32 degrees and you have to look it up, most other people would know that. Information shared by a cultural or national group, such as the names of famous heroes or events in the nation's history that are remembered and celebrated. So let's go back to the purchase of Alaska from Russia. A lot of people might not know that, but because that's part of our national group, it's part of our history, the date, it's something that you could look up in many places and find. It is still considered common knowledge. Also, knowledge shared by members of a certain field, such as the fact that the necessary condition for diffraction of radiation of wavelength from a crystalline solid is given by Bragg's law. In your case, Common knowledge will be some of the things that you've learning in law enforcement. So you don't necessarily have to cite it if you're writing for other law enforcement people. But what you have to remember is what may be common knowledge in one culture, nation, academic discipline, or peer group may not be common knowledge in another. For instance, if you were in France, the date and the fact that the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia is not common knowledge for them because that's an American thing and not a French thing. That being said, when the revolution took place in France, is common knowledge to people who are French, but it is not common knowledge necessarily for us. So how do I determine if the information I am using is common knowledge? So to help you decide whether information can be considered common knowledge, ask yourself, who is my audience? What can I assume they already know? And will I be asked where I obtain my information? So those are some of the questions to consider. So here's some examples. A description of the symptoms of Asperger's syndrome would need to be cited for a composition in general writing, like English 101, but probably not need a citation for an audience of graduate students in psychology. A reference to the practice of fair value accounting would be understood by a group of economists, but would need a citation for an audience of non-experts, which would be all of us. A statement reporting that 24% of children under the age of 18 live in households headed by single mothers would need to be cited because it's specific information that wouldn't be known to the average reader. And, it could vary because someone else might go and do another survey and come up with a different answer. The best advice that I can give you, though, is when in doubt, cite your source. You'll never go wrong for saying where information came from. So what is not common knowledge? What is not common knowledge are data sets generated by you or others. So for instance, if you did a survey of, all the people going through class 153 and you take those numbers and you manipulate the information and run statistics on it, you would need to cite it, even though you gathered the information yourself. Statistics obtained from sources such as the Census Bureau or Bureau of Labor Statistics, you need to cite. References to studies done by others, you need to cite. And references to specific dates, numbers, or facts the reader would not know unless they had done the research. So for instance, if you were writing about conspiracy theories dealing with JFK's assassination, not necessarily common knowledge. But if you're talking about the day that he was assassinated and what the weather was like and what his wife was wearing and the convertible they were driving in, common knowledge. So hopefully this will help you a little bit in determining it.